What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Maylari. So today is a very special episode. I'm going to be joined by my friend Chris Cotillo of MassLive.com. He's a Red Sox beat reporter for them and knows it all from the Red Sox to every sports. I'm going to have him come on today. We're going to talk about the Red Sox, how their season's going, talk about their injuries, talk about some players that are playing well, some players that are struggling, and then maybe get into some other stuff within the world of sports as well. I'm going to get him on in just 1 second. I'll be back with you guys in just a minute. So here we are, back live here with Chris Cotillo, Red Sox beat writer from MassLive.com, Boston College professor as well. What an absolute legend. Thank you so much for coming on, Chris. How you doing today?
I'm good. Look, you can't say professor. I don't have my PhD. Adjunct instructor. That's what they told me. So I made that mistake when they brought me aboard, and I was very quick to learn that if you don't have your PhD, if you haven't done those extra years of school, you're going to go with adjunct instructor. So I learned my lesson.
All right, we'll take instructor then. But you were great at it regardless, whether it was being professor or instructor. But I really enjoyed your class. Every Monday night was truly a pleasure. I mean, it was everything I'd ever want to do in a class, just talk sports, read things about sports. That's just all I want to do. So it was quite a class, and then you also killed it as always. So much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks. That was an adventure, I think. I've never taught before in that setting. Never, so to have to be, in front of 24 people, obviously, I think we had some funny bumps in the road. And, there was guest speakers who didn't show up sometimes. And then there was the time I brought everybody bowling, and I had I thought my foot was broken. I couldn't even walk around the bowling alley. There were some fun times there. So,
great memories.
Learning for a year or two here to start in August.
Yeah, you're gearing up for pretty soon now, a couple months away. So that'll obviously be exciting. As I said, though, that's everything I'd ever want in a class is just being able to talk sports, read sports. Obviously, all the guests you had come in were great. Tony Maserati.
You got an A. That's why it's everything you wanted.
I guess so. Yeah, it was an A. I'll say that. But just in general, I mean, I learned a ton, obviously, and regardless of the grade or not, I enjoyed it thoroughly. And all the guests you had come in were great. Jemai Webster and Chris Smith. You had your whole squad come in, which was awesome. Rob Bradford. So it was quite a time. So thank you for all that. And much appreciated you making the time to come on today. I'm sure you're busy. So we can dive into the Sox. So currently right now I sit at 31-30, 12.5 games back at Tampa Bay in the division. The last in the division would be their third time in the last 4 years, obviously, which obviously have to be better than that considering with the Red Sox. But at the end of the day, we are in the toughest division of baseball. Where do you see this team going? I know you had them at 500 in your predictions. Do you see them improving at all over 500? I know you had them at 81-81. Right now today, would you say they still finish around 81-81?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a 500 team that had a ceiling to be better if healthy. And we've seen over the course of the last few weeks getting healthier with Duvall and Story, coming back, Yu Chang, Arroyo, some of these guys, Schwarber, which are important reinforcements. But to me, that's all kind of canceled out by the fact that Chris Sale got hurt the other day. If he's out even for a few starts, even if it's 3 weeks to a month, you're losing a guy who really looked like an ace the last few weeks. And everybody knows that. The less than a 3 ERA and a 7-start span. He looked like the Chris Sale of old, and I think, it's a huge ask to have kind of the rest of your pitching staff try to step up. We're just look at the guys that, they are going to have to pitch in Sale's place. Cutter Crawford's been okay. He's no Chris Sale. You're going to have, a spot starter tomorrow night in Cleveland, whether that be Chris Murphy or Matt Dermody or an opener. You'd rather have Chris Sale on the mound than any of those options. So, it's, I think, just a huge blow, even if it's for a short amount of time. They've been kind of vague about it and not really sure, how long it's going to be. I think it kind of depends on how he reacts this week. But, still, it's a team that needed to stay healthy. They're getting healthy. Duvall should be back Friday. Yu Chang should be back next week. Arroyo already back. As I said, Schreiber and some of these relievers getting closer, in terms of key pieces. But the Sale thing, I think, is just such a tough blow. And you really can't afford, any more injuries now. You can't afford a guy, anybody else in your rotation to go down. So
100%.
That to me is there's some, and there's obviously some injury risk there, right? I mean, Paxton's been incredible, but he's a guy that's often hurt.
100%.
Whitlock is a guy that has been hurt already twice this year. So, they're teetering, I think, and unless they, get some reinforcements, I think this is right about where they'll be.
100%. Yeah, I think you said it perfectly about Chris Sale. He's just starting to find his footing. His last 6 starts, 2.25 ERA, 4-0 record, 41 Ks to 5 walks in 36 innings. He was just starting to look like the Chris Sale of old, getting the fastball up to 99, at one point in the middle of May. Was just about, looking like the Chris Sale of old that we really need, especially with this team, like you said, very thin pitching-wise, especially top of the rotation. I mean, if you look at it, Sale was the only guy that's really the only ace on the team. I mean, you have guys that could potentially turn into aces one day. I mean, I know Brayan Bello, a lot of people are confident in, and I love Tanner Houck. I think Tanner Houck could be a potential 2 or 3 one day, even though right now, he's been struggling a little bit overall in the season. He's had some good starts, though, obviously, but Chris Sale, obviously, they needed to be that number one guy to stay healthy. And overall, I mean, on the year, 5-2 record, and this is a guy that has really been struggling to stay healthy over the last, 3 or 4 years now, but to see him and how well he's pitching now, it's just the worst timing for an injury. But like you said, other guys are going to step up, whether it's Cutter Crawford or even the openers tomorrow. I know that Murphy guy they just called up in the last few days, right?
Right, yeah. He's a former 6th-round pick, one of their top pitching prospects, but his ERA this year was like 8. So he's not been pitching super well in Worcester, obviously. Mm-hmm. They have him available out of the bullpen, but he's an option. So, they're kind of stringing it together this week. It's been kind of difficult. You lose Sale, and then you go into that crazy weekend with a rain out, a doubleheader, a makeup game Monday, and then, a six game road trip. So they're kind of piecing it together as they go before they reset over the weekend. I think Whitlock on Friday, and then they get back to, Houck and then Bello in New York. So that's the plan. Again, there's just kind of some piecing together that needs to happen in like the next 24, 48 hours.
100%. Yeah, so like you said about Duvall, he'll be back within the next week. Obviously, he was having a crazy start to the season, 4 home runs in the first 8 games, 1544 OPS over that stretch for the wrist injury, hitting 455. Where do you think he hits in the lineup? Do you think he goes back to being the cleanup hitter? Or I know obviously Devers has been struggling, and whether you have Devers be the 3, 4, regardless, he's been struggling in the lineup now to where he's been. Where do you see Duvall stepping back into the lineup? Do you see him going back to cleanup?
I think it's more about protecting Devers, because Devers has been a guy who you haven't had the big bat around really for a few months now, and I know Duran stepped up and hit well at times, and there's been guys, whether it be Turner's been okay for stretches, or obviously Yoshida. They figured that out here and there, switching back and forth between Yoshida second and Devers fourth, or whatever it is. So I think Duvall probably goes right back in the middle of that mix somehow. When they started the season, it was Duvall for the first week was hitting 5th behind Yoshida as the cleanup guy. So I could see him kind of now that they have Devers more often in that cleanup spot, probably have they probably go back and forth. I think.
Mix it.
Yeah, I mean they've Cora seems to like certain matchups and to do it in certain ways, and we've seen Yoshida here in the last couple of weeks back and forth. Last week and over the last couple of nights, last night he was hitting second again. So I think they'll mix and match on a daily basis. I think a big right-handed bat is going to be good. We've seen at times they've struggled with that. Turner obviously has been a guy who's been up and down, but Kiké has not really hit all year. We've seen over the course of the year, Wong has been up and down. Whoever they've had at second, whether it be Arroyo or Pablo Reyes, they've been up and down, but okay. And then obviously some struggles out of some of the other guys. Ref Snyder's taken on a pretty big role, a role bigger than you'd expect as a right-handed bat in that lineup. So that'll be good just to have him and Duvall and Story come back and give you the lineup that they envision. I mean, you have Verdugo, Devers, Turner, Duran, Story, and Duvall in there. It's a pretty good top 6 if Casas can get it going and the catchers can get it going and stuff like that. So they're not too far away from that. Obviously, going to get a little closer with Duvall probably coming back on Friday.
Definitely, yeah. So like you said, I mean, Story be a big add to that lineup, and like you said, I mean, the other guys coming back too. It does become a good 1 through 6 in the batting order. I mean, we saw some lineups earlier in the year where it was, I forget what day it was middle of April, where the only guy in the lineup that was even decent, I think it was like Turner or something at Devers. It was like, Pablo Reyes in the lineup and Emmanuel Valdez, which these guys have stepped up. I'm not saying these guys, some of them have made some plays like Connor Wong and stuff, but out of big names, though, there was a lineup, there was only one guy that had, any what of a name, in the game of baseball. So they've had some tougher lineups with injuries. I'm a big Jarren Duran guy. He's been a guy that stepped up, obviously, and has gotten a chance to play a lot with the injuries. One guy that we mentioned, Trevor Story, very lightly. Any update on him? I know you said he'll probably be back within the next month. Does that mean a month he's going to be playing in AAA and, rehabbing, a month he's back in the Red Sox lineup?
Yeah, there's a couple of possibilities. With the way his injury works, it's really all about throwing, so they could bring him back as a DH before he's, ready to play in the field again. I think they want him, obviously, to be more than 100% to get back to playing shortstop, and that's what's going to happen. He's going to be the shortstop when he comes back. He's throwing from, pretty long distance down to Fort Myers and hitting in the cage and getting back to full strength. So, it'll be interesting to see, and probably around the All-Star break, which is about, 4 or 5 weeks away. Is this a guy who at that point is going to, are they going to say, hey, go to AAA and, make sure you're 100% with the throwing, or come up and, throw before games and be our DH? It could go either way. We saw Harper kind of do similar stuff over the last couple of years with a more serious injury. So it kind of depends on, I think, where they are, at that point. It could be, a panic move of like, hey, we need Trevor Story in the lineup. We're, faltering, let's do it. If they're in a good spot, they could slow play it a little bit more. So I think the possibilities are there. I would guess that, maybe around the All-Star break if he's just as the DH, and maybe around August 1st if he's the full-time shortstop.
Yeah.
And obviously, if he becomes the DH to start, that doesn't mean he can't be the shortstop later on. But considering, how much of a struggle shortstop has been, I kind of think they might take it carefully here. We've seen, obviously, Kiké Hernandez struggling a lot and, piecemeal together. I think they're excited, not a big name at all, but I think they're excited to get Yu Chang back in a few days because he's a guy that give them, before he got hurt, a lot of defensive stability there.
Yeah, he's been good. He's been good defensively. I thought the Sox would even look into a guy like Jose Iglesias at some point and bring him back, since he was very good for the Sox defensively, in that 2021 run right before, obviously his season was cut short since he wasn't, able to play in the playoffs. So they picked him up so late in the season. But, yeah, Chang will be a big add back to the lineup, obviously, defensively. And like you said, with Kiké at short, 13 errors on the year here at shortstop for him. Number one in baseball in errors overall. The Sox have 15 errors as a team at shortstop, 12 of them being on bad throws, 5 more than any team in baseball at the shortstop position. Do you see this as a cause of concern? Obviously, with Story coming back, that obviously be a big help, to the defense. But overall, defensively, the Sox have struggled on the season. Obviously, you had that bad play, that Little League home run, for Yadi Diaz against the Rays this past weekend. Do you see these errors as something that's a long-term concern, or do you see it as something that can be fixed, whether it be, making the right throw? I mean, that's obviously a big part of the game of baseball is, throwing to the right base. I know the Red Sox missed some cutoff men over the weekend and stuff. Do you see this as a big cause of concern?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it just speaks to, lack of fundamentals or the message not getting across or whatever that might be, and so far, it's something that's really, really bothered Alex Cora throughout the course of the season. And of course it should, it's a thing that, as you said, these are baseball basics. These are fundamentals. These are the first things you learn in spring training, even the first things you learn in Little League. So
yeah.
I think that's been very, very frustrating for him, especially as a guy who prided himself on defense throughout his career. I think there's just some guys that are, out of place. Kiké is not a shortstop.
Yep.
They just don't really have a choice for the next couple of weeks. Maybe Arroyo plays some games there in the interim.
Yep.
I think we saw on Monday, the first time Kiké had played center field in a long time.
Yep.
How good he was out there, yeah. So it's one of those things where they've tried to piece it together. It's not been pretty, especially with the way Kiké's played shortstop. He has been when he's been the shortstop. I'm looking. It was the last time before the other day was April 22nd, so we're going on a month plus with them. Really, while Yu Chang has been out, they haven't really had a choice. So. It's been tough to watch. I think, the throwing errors have given away a lot of outs. It's obviously always impossible to quantify the cause and effect of these things, but let's say that, a couple errors don't happen. Maybe they have 3 or 4 more wins.
Definitely.
And not one game above 500, but 4 or 5. And, at the end of the year, that could make a huge difference.
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's been an issue overall, whether it's, shortstop or just in general. 40 errors on the season for the Red Sox. Third most in the league. And obviously, like you said yesterday on the Baseball Hour with Tony Maserati, I mean, Alex Cora was a defensive guy when he played, in the MLB. He was great, being able to play multiple positions and always play the game the right way. And obviously this has to be something that frustrates him, I'd imagine, especially that Little League home run play. I mean, you've got to be there was 3 or 4 bad, decisions on that play. Whether it was even Duran jogging to the ball in the outfield. I know Tony Maserati was mad about that yesterday, which I didn't even see the play live. I watched the replay of it, right after it happened, then saw it again yesterday after you pointed out Duran jogging. Duran jogged. Verdugo with the throw in, which wasn't a bad throw to the cutoff man. They throw it to the plate, and then Wong throws it to center field. And it was just a mess all around. And that's obviously has to be something that frustrates a guy like Alex Cora, a guy that you pointed out was a very sound, fundamental baseball player when he was in the MLB.
Yeah, it is. It's he seemed kind of dejected the other day, just like I don't know what we have to do. We told these guys what to do, and the message isn't getting across, and we have to be better. No more excuses. We have to execute. We have to be better, and just kind of challenging his guys, like, hey, you gotta figure this out, or the season's getting to a point where it's not April, it's not May anymore. We're getting into the meat of it, and you guys have to figure this out, or throw away games and throw away a chance to be in the postseason.
100%. So in the past week, the Sox did DFA Rafael Tapia just a few days ago now. I believe it was on Monday morning. So that means now they're committing to Jarren Duran, obviously for this season. I think obviously for the future as well. I mean, he's a guy that's only 26 years old. Earliest he can be a free agent is 2029. So I think it makes sense, obviously, you rolling with him rather than keeping a guy like Tapia, sending Duran down. Duran has been struggling, though. I know you pointed out yesterday he was 3 of 31, I believe, on that away stretch. In his last 15 games, he's only hitting 132, 189 slugging, 367 OPS, 23 strikeouts with 3 walks over those 15 games. And one thing, which obviously the batting average is concerning and the slugging, the OPS is concerning, no stolen base attempts in his last 15 games. And this is a guy that should be using his speed, obviously, to his advantage, a guy that came in right away and was, top of the AL in doubles, even though he only played about 8 games and everyone else played about 15 by the point, that he made it into the lineup. Do you see it as concerning that he's been struggling, obviously, over the last 15 games, or do you think he has a chance of turning it around? I still have confidence in him. I told you, during spring training, I thought I would roll with him over Tapia, but at the end of the day, do you think he's a guy that can turn it around? I know last year he was really hot for a stretch and then cooled off like this over, 20 to 30 game stretch and, brought his batting average way down to, about 240. Where do you see Duran improving? Do you see him improving? How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I mean, as Alex Cora said the other day, if you looked at the beginning of the season, he's hitting 280 with a 777 OPS, 16 doubles, 22 RBIs, seven stolen bases, which is as many as he had a year ago, and 7 for 7 in stolen bases. Like, you'd take that. Obviously, those numbers were super inflated a few weeks ago, and they come way back down to earth with the struggles. I think, we've seen, and I've written especially about, Duran and the mental side of the game and making sure that everything, is okay in that end. I think the Red Sox need to make sure that's the case. This is a guy that, has been at a very up and down, major league career, very streaky, kind of, almost reminiscent of Jackie Bradley Jr. almost. Except with Jackie, you could deal with it a little bit more because the defense was so good. Duran's gotten better in that regard, but not as elite as Jackie Bradley. So, the Red Sox, I think it's interesting to see that they're putting him in the lineup on a daily basis. They're, committing to him. Obviously, the at-bats are going to be a little lesser when Duvall comes back just because you're adding another outfielder to the mix. And, it was already a crowded mix. It's going to get even more crowded. I do think I was surprised by the Tapia move. I think it's also, in another way, a vote of confidence in Valdez and Pablo Reyes and some of these guys they have.
True.
At least in the short term. I know another roster move is going to come on Friday. So, good for Duran for kind of asserting himself. He earned the right to be on the major league roster, even with these struggles. I think they don't want to, go through the whole sending him down thing. And, Tapia just one of those, Tapia played well too. So, it wasn't like he was lopped off the roster for bad performance. It was just, kind of the case of they needed to make a decision on who they wanted to prioritize, and they did that with Duran.
Definitely, especially with those guys coming back. Like you said, Duvall coming back, and even Arroyo is a guy that can play the infield and the outfield. Him, coming back, he has add some utility to that lineup. He's another guy that can play an outfield position, even if he's not, the best right fielder. He can still step out there if he needed to. But like you said, I mean, that's how it is at the end of the day. I mean, Tapia is now essentially a journeyman. He goes from Colorado to Toronto. Now the Red Sox probably find himself a new home rather soon, I'd imagine, especially considering he was still hitting pretty decent for the Sox, 264, a home run, 10 RBIs in 39 games, 701 OPS. Was pretty good defensively as well. But a guy like Duran, who's gotten better defensively. Like you said, he's not really an elite defender, but he's gotten better. No errors on the year. Definitely improved at the plate as well, even despite the recent struggles. He's a guy I do have a lot of confidence in, and hopefully uses his speed. I mean, he is first in the team in stolen bases, and that's something that he adds, to the lineup that's so dynamic. I mean, the Red Sox don't really have many base stealers. It's kind of lost out in the game of baseball overall nowadays, stealing bases. But hopefully find him a way to get him back on base, and I'm sure, the stolen base attempts will go up. Considering he only hit 132 over the past 15 games, there's not really many opportunities for him to get on base. So we'll see obviously what happens there, but I'm a big Duran guy, so hopefully, he turns things around there. But one guy's been struggling, obviously, Rafael Devers, we talked about very briefly in the beginning. Hitting only 241 on the season, 478 slugging, 774 OPS. Does have 13 home runs, but hasn't hit a home run since May 19th. Over his last 14 games, hitting just 167 with just 5 RBIs and a 222 OPS. What is going on with Devers at the dish? I know obviously he's been struggling, and if you look at the numbers, they're obviously concerning. But even when you watch the games, you see him swinging at pitches he shouldn't be swinging at. You see him, over a couple of pitches over his head over the weekend I saw him swing at. What is going on with Devers at the dish? Do you think it's just him getting in his head? Do you think it's him trying to do too much? What do you see with Devers right now?
Yeah, it's just, obviously I think one of the worst stretches we've seen out of him in a little while. And that happens. I think, he's a guy that, they can't pitch around him. There's not the protection there used to be, as we talked about yesterday on the radio. And, I think there's, when you don't have JD Martinez and Xander Bogaerts and all that type of stuff, no offense to Duran and Ref Snyder and some of these guys, they're not as imposing as these guys they've had around them for their entire career. So, I think that's played into it. I think maybe pressing after getting the big contract has played into it. You never, can really project and pretend to be inside a guy's head, but, that's one guy that, obviously the Red Sox need to step up more. As I said too yesterday, like his floor, Devers, I think if you, look at what his season has been, I know he hasn't homered here in a while, so the power totals are a little lower, but, it's hitting, his floor is a 774 OPS. It's obviously 100 points less than it was last year when he was an All-Star and got MVP votes. But this is like as bad as he could possibly be. 241, 13 homers, 49 RBI, which is still a lot, and 774 OPS. You got to figure in a 109 or a 106 OPS plus, which is above league average. You got to think he's going to break out and get really hot at some point. And I still think that's going to happen, and probably. We'll make it easier when Duvall is back and eventually Story's back, and around Yoshida and Devers, those guys can really mash. So I'm not worried about it. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a struggle here so far. And if you had told me at the beginning of the year Devers would be hitting 241, I would say, well, the Red Sox are probably 10 games under 500 then, and that has not been the case. So it hasn't sunk them like some of these other things, the bad defense and the rotation and stuff. It's just, I think he's going to get hot at some point.
You'd hope so, especially, considering he's the big bat in the Sox line, got the big contract extension. And sometimes, I'm not saying this is for Devers, but sometimes guys do get that big extension and, take a seat back and relax. I'm not saying that's for Devers, but, it does happen in sports where guys get big contracts and, they cash in and then just relax. But I did mess up one stat. I said 222 OPS over that 14-game stretch, 222 slugging with a 480 OPS over that stretch. But he does obviously have to be better. And like you said, it's not just Devers. I mean, there's a lot of things with the Sox right now, considering pitching's been a struggle. Obviously, the starting rotation, Houck, Garrett Whitlock, Brayan Bello with the young guys. Bello's probably the best of the three right now. He's shown probably the best, stuff so far. 3.97 ERA, 9 starts. I know you do like Garrett Whitlock. You see him as a big piece of the future, as do most Sox fans, as do I. Where do you see this Sox rotation going? I know, obviously, with Chris Sale's injury, that's tough. Nick Pavetta's made the transition to the bullpen. Corey Kluber's been, brutal. I mean, he's only made, 9 starts. He's only made, 11 appearances overall in the year, 2 of them coming from the pen. Do you think Kluber gets cut soon? I mean, there's a lot of things, with the Sox rotation. I don't think they can just cut ties with all these guys, considering Pavetta, you need him at least, in the bullpen, considering he can still start a game if you need him to. But where do you see the Sox rotation going?
I mean, they prioritized depth heading into the season, and they had what they thought would be, 7 guys for 5 spots heading in.
Yep.
And then, you add Cutter Crawford to that mix. He ended up making the opening day rotation because 3 different guys were hurt at the top.
Yep.
And, he's actually had a pretty good year, and I think he's probably going to be the guy that as they are tonight, shoehorn into the rotation here. I think there's upside. We've seen Whitlock be up and down. I think he's still feeling himself out as a major league starter. A guy that has not really done it much over the course of his career.
Yeah.
Or has not done it in the majors, I should say, over the course of his career. So, that's something that is going to be, a thing for the next few days or for the next few outings to see how Whitlock responds. I think Bello has been pretty good throughout the year. There's been some uneven starts, but generally the stuff has been really good. I think Paxton has been excellent.
Yep.
We saw that again last night.
Great last
night. So Paxton and Bello kind of leading the charge. And then, Whitlock, I think, has the ceiling. Houck has the ceiling. And you're going to have Cutter Crawford in the mix, too. And the thing is, maybe Pivetta gets some wind under his sails in the bullpen pitching well and finds something, and they decide, we'll give him another chance in the rotation, and he goes on a hot streak. Maybe that happened with Kluber. I do think that this is an area that as we get, it's June 7th, so we can't get too far ahead of ourselves. But,
yeah.
We're as we get the calendar turns from June to July, it's always time to start looking at, what could they possibly do at the trade deadline. And I think at this point, that is, probably an area where I wouldn't be surprised if they, made an upgrade or tried to add somebody, especially if Sale is out for a while. I mean, there's going to be a lot of good starting pitchers available. You look at some guys even from the Central, Giolito, and maybe Dylan Cease, guys like that. Do you make a big trade and try to do that? I think that they could use a guy who is a controllable starting pitcher, a guy you could have for a little while.
Definitely.
I think that that's, it's not, they have obviously Whitlock, Bello, and Houck as guys that they expect to have for a while, but, Paxton is not under control for a while. You can't trust Sale. Pivetta is a free agent after next year. Kluber, you don't want, but he's a free agent after this year. So, there's some guys that they might like to go and add kind of a bona fide number one or a number two, for a couple seasons, and that would take a big prospect haul. We haven't seen Chaim Bloom be willing to do that since he took over a few years ago. So, that's something that I think they should do. Will they do it? Remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean the Sox have built their farm system. I know that's something that Chaim Bloom came in with a vision and a goal to build a farm system. Obviously, the bad 2020 season got them a guy like Marcelo Mayer, who's going to be hopefully perennial all-star one day for the Sox. Considering we really don't have much to look forward to, with the future coming in. We do have a decent farm system. It's not as good as it once was before Dombrowski really blew it up. I mean, we were one of the best in baseball. Now we started building again, obviously, and I know you probably know way more guys, that are in the farm system more than me. But Mayer's obviously that big guy in the big name, and something that all Sox fans can at least latch on to and look forward to. But you can't, just expect him to come in, and be hitting 350 and in raking and playing great defensively. So we'll see obviously what happens there. Do you see any chance that he's in the Red Sox lineup even a year from now, maybe in a September call-up next season, or do you think he's going to be a couple years down the road?
Yeah, I mean, he's already, at Double-A at 20, so I think that's a sign that, maybe next year he's going to, accelerate. He's going to push to accelerate. I think for Chaim Bloom, the goal is always, to take these guys as slowly as possible, slow play it, whatever it may be. So, they're always careful. I think that's kind of how they've always done it. Even with Casas, he, took a long time last year to come up.
Definitely.
And, maybe that was for the better, considering how he struggled this year at the plate, average-wise and stuff like that. So, I think they're going to slow play him. He's obviously the rest of the guy that
the prize possession,
I think. Yeah.
Definitely.
So he's the main one, as I said yesterday. I think Bello's one of the other guys, and that could obviously be a kind of a blue chipper for them. Beyond that, not a lot of obvious options in that way.
Definitely, 100%. I mean, those are the top end guys there. Bello, made his start last year, his first MLB debut. Obviously, getting that start was obviously great to see. He did struggle a little bit, but he's shown better stuff towards the end of last season, and then obviously this season is pitching pretty well. But I'm sure they won't rush a guy like Marcelo Mayer, considering that's the biggest piece we have to look forward to for the future. And I'm going to go back really quick just to the rotation just for 1 second. You were talking about Nick Pivetta making the transition to the bullpen, and his last 4 appearances out of the pen: 1.59 ERA, 8 Ks, 3 walks, 5 2/3 innings. He's pitched pretty well out of the pen. A guy Corey Kluber hasn't really been pitching well, whether it's in the starting rotation or out of the pen. Do you see the Sox cutting cords with Corey Kluber at any point, just DFAing him?
I mean, Kluber was on the mound for that Little League homer the other day, so his numbers are a little inflated based
True.
on that.
I didn't think about that. You're right.
So that last outing, 2 earned runs. It's not really not really fair. The day before that, he threw 6 pitches in a 1-2-3 inning, and that was his first time pitching in over 2 weeks. So, I mean, look, it's always good to have as much depth as possible. We've seen that already, tested now. The Red Sox are down to move to another guy here, and is Kluber going to be a lights out reliever? Probably not. But keeping him on the team, giving him the chance to work some things out over the next couple of weeks, I think is probably going to be valuable for them too. So. He's a guy that I don't think was a good signing, obviously. It's a guy that was, obviously really a disaster over the course of over the first few starts he made. But they have to kind of see this through a little bit longer. And if they have to DFA him, if they add, upgrade at the trade deadline, then that'll end up being the case.
Definitely. So I'm excited to see, what they do at the deadline. Obviously, a guy Chaim Bloom last year had the chance to rip it up at the deadline and send JD Martinez one way. Obviously traded Christian Vazquez. Had his opportunity to trade JD Martinez. Bogaerts was even in trade talks. I didn't really see them trading Bogaerts, but I thought JD was definitely going to be gone. And now you see a guy like JD go to the Dodgers. Now he's had somewhat of a resurgence, 15 home runs, tied to 9th in the MLB. He only had 16 home runs last year for the Sox, and I believe it was 139 games. Has 15 home runs already for the Dodgers. Which is just ridiculous considering last year, we thought his power numbers were going down, going the opposite way. Everyone thought he was on regression, including myself. And now you see him 15 home runs, hitting 277, 6th best OPS in baseball at 947, 2nd best slugging in the MLB at 633, 3 home runs in the last 4 games. So obviously you look at Chaim Bloom's decisions. I know you talked about this yesterday with Maz, obviously, and the Mookie Betts trade and some other things that went into, the way we look at Chaim Bloom and his resume, whether it's letting Kyle Schwarber just walk, letting Xander Bogaerts walk, trading Mookie Betts, trading Benintendi. There's a lot of things that go into, how we grade Chaim Bloom. Who do you think's more on the hot seat? Chaim Bloom or Alex Cora? Obviously, Alex Cora is working with the team that Chaim Bloom is giving him. So obviously not all of it is on Cora. But who's more on the hot seat, do you think, by the end of this season?
Well, I think Chaim Bloom, just because, it's now been, Cora has won. In his tenure, we saw that in 2018, obviously. Chaim Bloom, does not have that World Series ring under his belt, which I think is a big difference. I think, a caller, who didn't know my name on 98.5 yesterday.
I listened to that guy. Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah, thought this was a ridiculous
Whatever
take.
Your name is, he said. Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, thought this was a ridiculous take, but, I think it's just a tough ask to ask Chaim Bloom to come in here and give him 4 seasons, one of them a pandemic season where everything's all screwed up.
Definitely.
2020, 2021, 22, and 23, and say, completely revamp the farm and completely, do your long-term view. I think 4 years is, I would give him 5. So, coming in and telling him that you need to have the long-term view in mind and then pulling the plug, I think is somewhat of a big ask.
Definitely.
But, this is Boston. People get impatient. Ownership, these guys they're not young guys, and I think that they, could get a little impatient. We're seeing that in Foxborough now. Bob Kraft is saying, all right, it's been, 2 years,
Definitely.
3 years, we haven't won a playoff game, or 4 years, we haven't won a playoff
No
game.
Brady, too, yeah.
Let's start turning this around. And I think that, John Henry's in his 70s, Tom Werner in his 70s. Wouldn't be surprised if they started kind of thinking the same way.
Definitely, 100%. The time, is ticking for Cora, for Bloom, but I think I would agree more on Bloom. And same thing with the Patriots. They have a lot of decisions to make in their upcoming future. If this season doesn't work out, Bill Belichick, I don't think they can fire a guy like Belichick, but, maybe mutually, go their separate ways. But that might be a hot take. But regardless, things have to happen. You need results. It's a results business in baseball, in the NFL, and sports in general. So obviously there's a lot of things to figure out there for the Sox and the Patriots. I think if you look at the Bloom era with the Red Sox, his first goal coming in, the first task the Sox gave him was to get under the luxury tax, and obviously part of that was trading Mookie Betts, getting rid of David Price. You pointed out yesterday was a big, part of that trade, getting rid of Mookie. But I don't really blame Bloom for trading Mookie. I think it was more of an ownership decision. I would have kept Mookie, obviously, considering how much talent he had. I know the goal was to get under the luxury tax, but I think it was a John Henry decision. I think they said to Bloom coming in, find a way to trade Mookie. He's not going to take, the 10 years, $300 million. I think the Sox offered him. Find a way to move him, get as much back as we can in return, and obviously get us under the luxury tax. I don't think you can say, as first-year chief baseball officer for a team, the best decision we can make is trading Mookie Betts. Considering how talented he is, it's just like when the Giants traded Dave Gettleman, the Giants GM traded Odell. At the time, I said to my dad, I don't think you can say, oh, we're going to make this team better by trading Odell. I think it was an ownership decision in the Odell trade. I think the same thing here with the Red Sox trading Mookie. How do you feel about that? I mean, that's a take that I don't know if many people have. That's just a take that I have. But do you think John Henry was involved in that deal?
Yeah, of course. I think he mandated that they get under the luxury tax, and when that happens, that's obviously I think it's that was the easiest way to do it. So I don't think he said you have to trade Mookie. They just once they couldn't come to a contract extension with him, I think the writing was on the wall. And I've always been one to say that I don't think there was a path forward with the two sides here. So you might as well get something. They would have gotten a draft pick for him if they let him walk in a year. But then at that point, the pressure's on to really get a good deal for him. They weren't. They weren't able to get superstars. They were able to get, probably a couple good players, and obviously Wong and Verdugo, who we've seen, be pretty good this year. But they were not able to get, the superstar, as I said, Ahmed Rosario and
Jimenez. Andres
Jimenez, right, as the returns for Lindor in that big trade. It's not really comparable, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think the Sox obviously envisioned Jeter Downs being, a big-time prospect. Considering he was a top, in the Dodgers, farm system at the time, they probably saw him as a bigger part of the deal. It was probably Verdugo, then Downs, I'd imagine, then Wong was probably just an add-in. And at the end of the day, obviously, Wong's earned himself a right to be on the roster now, and definitely was a bigger add in that, deal than Jeter Downs was. I was fairly confident in Jeter Downs. I thought he was going to be, a good player for the Sox in the future, considering the Dodgers farm system, there's not really many misses. If you look at this team now, a lot of rookies in that lineup. Miguel Vargas, James Outman. They had a guy, Michael Busch, as well. They have a guy, Andy Pajes, in their farm system in AAA. I think he just got hurt. But they have a lot of random guys in their farm system always end up being really good. So I thought Jeter Downs, considering he was a top prospect in their farm system, I thought he was going to be great, considering, they always find ways to hit on prospects. They always do. I mean, if you look at their team over the last 10 years, Cody Bellinger came up through that farm system. He was an MVP at one point. Looking at that farm system, I thought he was going to come over and be a big, part of that deal. Obviously, Verdugo is probably the main centerpiece of it. He was the top prospect for them at one point as well. But if you look at it now, it's really just Verdugo and then obviously Wong. And you probably should have got more. I would agree with your take yesterday. You definitely should have got more from Mookie Betts, considering he was a big part of their 2020 World Series run. And obviously now signed that 12-year deal with the Dodgers right after the trade. So they have him for, the rest of his career as well. So it wasn't just trading Mookie for one season, which it was, I guess, for the Red Sox, considering they weren't going to keep him for more than just a season. But you do trade him to a team where he's going to be for the rest of his career. So it's tough only getting just those two pieces in return. But if you look at it, like you said, I think the writing, was on the wall. I think he wanted to be in the center of LA, be in the spotlight, and obviously gets his payday as well. I mean, I think it was just the best of both worlds there for Mookie, whether it was money-wise or being in L.A. I think things just worked out for him there. And obviously for the Sox, Verdugo, I really like Verdugo. I think he brings a lot of swag and energy to the lineup. Obviously having a good season as well, 288 batting average, 5 home runs, 454 slugging, 816 OPS. I'm a big Verdugo guy, as you know, but at the end of the day, I think you should have got more in return for a guy like Mookie, considering how good of a player he is, and at the time was the second best player in baseball to Mike Trout when he was traded.
Yeah, it was, and look, it's a trade that we're going to revisit time and time again over the years. I think Verdugo making an All-Star team this year, which is possible, makes it a little bit easier to look back and a little bit better for the Red Sox. But still, as I said, these are not superstars or bona fide All-Stars they're getting. These are good parts, and I think that's difficult to look back and think about.
100%. And if you look at a lot of other decisions, whether it was the Mookie trade, obviously Mookie's now starting to heat up, playing better baseball, hitting 357 over the last 7 games, 4 home runs, 5 RBIs, 1240 OPS, 15 home runs on the year for Mookie, 15 for JD, both tied for 9th in baseball. Then you have Kyle Schwarber, who's struggling at the plate, batting average-wise, hitting just 173 on the year, but starting to heat up a little bit, 3 home runs in the last 6 games, 16 home runs as well, tied the 6th most in baseball. And then you also have Nate Eovaldi, 5th best ERA in baseball. These are all guys the Sox which Mookie's, further down the line now. It's, been 3 years. But for JD, Eovaldi, Schwarber over the past year or two now, especially even if you add in a guy like Michael Wacha, that's 3 guys the Sox moved on from within a year between JD, Eovaldi, and Wacha that are obviously excelling where they're at now. And a guy like Eovaldi, the Sox definitely could use in that top of that rotation right now, considering he's one of the most dominant pitchers in the MLB right now with, a 2.24 ERA, 5th best in baseball, 8-2 record. What went into the Sox letting Eovaldi go? Was it money? Was it injury concerns? In your opinion, what would you say was the biggest issue there with the Sox letting him go, or the biggest decision, in letting him go? The biggest idea? Why did they let him go in your eyes?
Well, I mean, I think that they are, a team that really wanted to re-sign Eovaldi. They liked him. They thought that the medicals were clear. They thought that he was the guy that, was going to be, better than the numbers indicated last year, just because the under the hood numbers were pretty good. With Wacha, it was actually the other way. The ERA and stuff were better, but the under the hood numbers, that's kind of why his market ended up cratering. With Eovaldi, the Red Sox thought that he was worth giving a 3-year deal. They offered that to him in early December. He was not. He did not accept because he thought he could get more money elsewhere. He ended up not. And by the time he had circled back to the Red Sox had already committed $16 million a year to Jansen over 2 years and $18 million a year to Yoshida, and they didn't have the money in the eyes of the decision makers to hand that out to him. So, I think that was a difficult thing because they wanted him, but he wouldn't, accept on their timeline. And when he ended up signing with Texas, 2 for 34, the Red Sox looked at it and thought, wow, we really, I can't believe he didn't take our deal, which was better than this. And
definitely.
We definitely would have done that deal. At that point, the ship had kind of sailed for them, and they think he overplayed his hand. So they had to pivot to Kluber, which was horrible. With Wacha, more unclear. He told me you're gonna have to ask Chaim Bloom why I'm not back with the Red Sox, which was
I heard that.
I think a little bit damning. And it's again with him, as everybody always said throughout the offseason, if you look at the numbers under the hood and the batting average, balls in play, and some of the StatCast numbers and stuff, it just was not. It suggested that he was not worth a big commitment. And so far in San Diego, he's proven people wrong with that.
Definitely 3.48 ERA, 5.2 record, 57 Ks and 62 innings pitched, 1.14 WHIP in 11 starts for San Diego. And if you look at his numbers last year for the Sox, 11-2 record, 3.32 ERA, and 23 starts, 104 Ks and 127 in the third innings. Was obviously the bright spot in that Red Sox rotation last year. I know Eovaldi did miss some games with some injuries as well. But those are two guys that move on from the Sox and definitely could be the 1-2-3 with Sale. If Sale would have been healthy this year, that could have been a great 1-2-3 rotation there. But we didn't really see that much last year of all three of those guys in the same lineup, in the same rotation, with Sale getting hurt after just, I believe it was 2 starts last year. So obviously it could have been a what if you bring back both those guys. I think Eovaldi, they probably wanted to bring back more. And considering Walker only got 1 year, $7.5 million, it must have been a high on Bloom thing, because I think the Sox definitely could have thrown out $8 million at him. Eovaldi, obviously, they offered him a bigger deal. He said no to it, and then at the end of the day, the Sox committed enough money elsewhere where they said it's just time to let him go. But for Walker, 1 year, $7.5 million, the Sox definitely could have afforded that. So it must have been a high on Bloom decision, saying we don't think he's going to do what he did last year again. And his ERA is essentially the same: 3.32 last year, 3.48 this year. So that's obviously a big decision they letting him go. But like some other things, some other players the Sox let go, Kyle Schwarber, sometimes it comes down to money. Sometimes you don't see them being sustainable for the future. Maybe JD Martinez they didn't see being sustainable, considering last year he wasn't really that great. They probably didn't expect him to have 15 home runs, at this point in the season. It's June 7th, and he's at 277 with a 947 OPS. I don't know if you can really forecast that, especially considering JD was not really hitting well last year. I know there was a time last season where Bogaerts, JD, and Devers were each hitting around like 200, over a 10 to 15 game stretch. I don't think the Sox really forecasted JD being this good, and maybe the same thing with Wacha. Eovaldi was good when he was on the mound. He was basically the ace when Chris Sale was out for a while, over that 3 or 4 year stretch where Chris Sale only made, 10 starts over 3 years just about. So there's a lot of decisions that go into it, and I'm sure part of it's money for some of them, but like you said for Walker, it probably was just a high on Bloom decision.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that go into this. I think with JD, I think the writing was on the wall. That was done after the year he had last year, and he got back with his swing coach in LA, guy who worked for the Dodgers.
Yep.
And I think that probably helped out. They were really happy with what Justin Turner's given them too. I know the stats aren't as sexy as what JD's given the Dodgers, but
definitely.
I think both teams are pretty happy with that turnout, how that turned out so far.
Definitely, and JD's obviously hitting well this year, and if you look at JT, he's having a decent year for the Sox, and like you pointed out yesterday, he's more of a leader on this Red Sox team. That's probably part of the reason they signed him, considering he's a vet, has been through it all, obviously with the LA Dodgers, and he's been around the league, he's been in some big games, obviously has a lot of experience as well, so that definitely goes into signing him and seeing that he can be a leader for this squad, especially a team that lost Xander Bogaerts, who was not their captain, but essentially their captain.
Right. I mean, the Xander loss, I think, is real just in a leadership way. But, I've always said you can't go to $280 million for that guy. I don't really blame, them for that. They screwed this up for a while last year, though.
Definitely. 100%. Yeah. And Bogaerts hasn't been hitting too well with San Diego. Had a hot stretch at one point, at the beginning of the season, but his batting average has come back down. I think he's around like 250 or 260, so he's not hitting as well as he did earlier in the season. One last thing I want to talk about in baseball, and this is just baseball in general. It's not really even just the Red Sox here, which it can connect to the Red Sox. Yes, if you think the Sox have a chance at him, Shohei Ohtani. I'm sure every single team in baseball at least is somewhat interested in him. There's only probably a few real suitors, whether it's the Dodgers, whether it's the Yankees, Mets, Padres. Where do you see Shohei Ohtani ending up? Whether it's if he were to be traded at the deadline this year, which I think is unlikely. I think the Angels will still hold on to him, even though they're right around 500 right now. Where do you think he ends up, whether it's in free agency or the trade deadline?
We had Mad Dog Russo on my pod a couple weeks ago, and he says that he thinks that he's going to end up with the Dodgers. Obviously, you can never discount that possibility just because, the Dodgers have a lot of money. They know he wants to stay on the West Coast, theoretically, all that type of stuff. So I think that's definitely an option. I think the Mets and Yankees are going to bid big, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the Red Sox get involved, if not just to kind of drum up some interest. 100%. I think that there's a possibility there. So, the Dodgers or the Angels for now make a lot of sense to me. I just think that it's probably one of those two teams, but I would doubt that he gets traded at the deadline. I think he's going to hit free agency, and the Angels are at least going to get the ticket sales and the interest in the team in him throughout the rest of the year. They don't want to let that go 2 months early when they don't have to. Definitely,
especially considering they have the first and second best players in the game of baseball, at least in my lifetime, over the last 10 years or so. You have two of the most dynamic players, and Mike Trout's been the best player in baseball since he stepped foot in the league. And then look at a guy like Ohtani. There's no one like him in any sport. How dynamic he is, pitching and hitting. I don't think they'll trade him. I think they'll keep him, up until the deadline and past the deadline. But I don't know if they really have a big shot at getting him back. I think the Dodgers make a lot of sense, like you said, like Mad Dog Russo said as well. If you look at it, the Dodgers, my main argument with the Dodgers signing him isn't just because they're not afraid of making a big move, whether it's trading for, Max Scherzer and Trey Turner a few years ago, or trading for Mookie Betts, or giving Freddie Freeman a big contract, giving Trevor Bauer a big contract, even though that didn't really work out. They're not afraid of making a big move. That's one thing with the Dodgers. That's why I don't think they'd be afraid of giving them $50, $60 million a year, whatever it may be. But if you look at it, this past offseason, they didn't really do much. They let Bellinger walk. They obviously let Justin Turner walk. They let Trey Turner walk. They let a lot of guys walk, saved a lot of money for the future. And that's a team that can spend money with just about anybody in baseball, whether it's the Red Sox or Yankees historically. But there's obviously a lot of things that are going to go into the Sox, and whether it's the Dodgers, the Mets, whatever teams it may be, trying to make a move for Shohei. But I think that the Angels will keep him, but I think the Dodgers make a lot of sense, especially considering he wants to be on the West Coast and be close to Japan. You would agree with that, right?
I don't know. At the end of the day, it's going to be money that tells the whole story.
Okay, so you think it's more money. I was thinking more location. I was thinking he wanted to be more, closer to Japan since it's closer to get there from California or whatever it may be, whether it's Seattle even on the West Coast than it would be from New York, Boston. But it could be money that goes into. I'm sure that will be a big part of it. And what would you forecast this deal being at? 50, 60 million, easy?
I don't know. It's impossible to tell how teams are going to value him. At least 40, at least 45, probably.
Okay.
It's gonna be ridiculous, whatever it is.
I've seen predictions at 60 million. I've seen predictions at 50 million, and I've seen some around 45, 48 a year. I think right now, the Dodgers make a lot of sense, giving them an 8-year deal, which it sounds crazy, 8 years, 400 million, but that definitely could be a case. But what chance would you give the Sox? What chance would you give the Sox?
15%.
Okay, I'll take that. Actually, that's not bad. That's not bad considering, you get a guy like Ohtani, even if it's 16% chance, 15% chance, 30% chance, I'll take that all day. That's awesome, though. That's great to hear as a Sox fan. So that's obviously big. But obviously, like you said, the Angels, the Dodgers, I'm sure they'll be, bidding high. And the Mets, that's a team that's not afraid, of spending big money. So I'm sure they'll be giving around $50 million as well. So there's a lot that's going to happen in baseball in the next year with Ohtani, especially. I'm sure there'll be trade talks. Even if they don't trade him, there will be rumors, I'm sure. You'd agree?
Yeah, I think teams are going to try. Of course you have to try. But, the Angels, they're always kind of in the same boat where, they have all the talent. They can never really put it together. You look at them at this point. We saw them play really well against the Red Sox. They're a game ahead of where the Red Sox are right now, so they're squarely in that wild card mix. They're probably going to make want to make one more run with Ohtani and Trout. They're not going to want to blow it up.
Definitely.
Even though that might be the smart move. So I would doubt that they're going to trade him, but you go on a 6-game losing streak here, maybe things change.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's how baseball is, right? You can't really look at just the past. You got to see where you're playing right now, currently. And that's why they obviously fired Joe Maddon last year. They looked at that 14-game stretch. It wasn't, Joe Maddon's a great manager, over his career, or we were playing great baseball in the first month and a half of the season. Let's see if we can get back. They saw that 14-game losing streak and things changed. So things could change here as well. But I think if you can keep Ohtani and Trout together, even if it's for another half a season, especially with that lineup, I think they have a lot of talent, the Angels. I had some high hopes for them coming into the season. Obviously, Rendon, Hunter Renfroe, Brandon Drury, Mickey Moniak's even playing good baseball right now, hitting well. Taylor Ward, Jared Walsh was a guy that killed the Red Sox last year when he played them. They have a lot of talent in that lineup, and that's why I wouldn't really want to blow things up, too quick. But at the same time, at the end of the day, you only get it for another half a season. You might as well keep them for that half and see if you can make a run. But considering where they're at right now, I think they still run with it. But like you said, if it's an 8-game losing streak, 6-game losing streak right before the deadline, there's a chance they bite, especially if they get a big return, if they get a Juan Soto return type of deal. I mean, there's a chance.
Always a chance. But with a guy like Marty Marino, who's kind of insane, and there's always a chance of doing something crazy.
Definitely. And Moreno, a guy that was going to sell the team last year and ended up, revoking that and now is going to stay with the team. But he's a guy that's too involved, obviously, with the front office decisions. So we'll see what happens there with the Angels. One last thing before I let you go. I know obviously you're probably busy. You got things going on, especially considering the Sox play tonight. We'll talk UNC really quick. UNC football, UNC basketball. Which one would you rather talk about for just a minute or two?
Football. It's almost football season.
All right, let's talk football. So they're 9-5 last year, obviously, and I know you're a big fan of the quarterback Drake May. 38 touchdowns last year, 7 picks, also adding in 7 rushing touchdowns. That's a guy that's going to be a top draft pick, at some point in the future. And you saw him play last year, right? At some point, you went to a game or two.
I went to the ACC championship game, which they got smoked. But yes,
they did. Yeah, they lost to Clemson, was it right? I remember you going to that game, which is obviously a tough one. But this is a team in the ACC where they competed last year, 9-5 record last year overall, and a team like Clemson.
They were also 9-1 to start. So
they were. I forgot about the losing stretch. I remember they were 9-5. I forgot they were that hot to start the year. I know they obviously lost their bowl game. I think it was to Oregon, right? Which is obviously tough. I think that was a close game, if I remember right. I don't think that was a blowout. But this is a team that could definitely compete in the ACC, especially if you're the quarterback. I mean, that's the NFL. It's football in general. If you have a quarterback, you can compete in any conference, any division. So where do you see this UNC team going this year? Do you think they can get back to the ACC championship again? Which I think they can, but where do you see them going?
It's always a challenge, as you said. The quarterback's, I think, a big piece of the puzzle, and they have a Heisman candidate, and so that's something that I think that is very important. He's the guy that's going to lead the team, and there's a lot of new pieces. Josh Downs, the number 1 receiver the last couple of years, is gone. So, they have a couple transfers coming in from Kent State and Georgia Tech, a couple of guys who are really pretty good. So, I think that obviously the offense will look a little different. The defense is always the problem for them. I always say you, me, and 9 other guys could go down and score on them. So Gene Shizik's going to figure that out.
You're right.
But, they have a tough schedule. They play Spencer Rattler in South Carolina week 1. They play Clemson at Clemson late. So, they got to step up and win some big games. I mean, it's, the Mac Brown era has been pretty good. They've been interesting and relevant, and they've, they made an Orange Bowl. They were a top 10 preseason team. And then last year they were, pretty good again down the stretch. But I feel like there's another step to take, and we'll see if that can happen this year.
Definitely. I mean, this is an ACC that's obviously competitive, but there's only really 3 really top-heavy teams. You look at Florida State, that's a team that'll be top 5 going into the year. Clemson's always good recruiting-wise, even though they had somewhat of a down year the last year or two, but they'll be just as good again, I'm sure. Obviously getting a new quarterback in there. And then a team like UNC, I think they're right there with those two. I think Florida State's probably obviously the leading candidate there in the ACC, considering they have their quarterback coming back and have probably the best edge rusher in football as well, in college football coming back as well. So we'll see what happens there. Hopefully UNC turns things around. Historically, as a team, they've been somewhat, respectable over the last 5 years, right? The Sam Howell days, they were really good. And at one point, they were ranked, I think, top 10 at that point, right, when they played BC. I think it was during that COVID year, 2020. I know you wanted to go to that game. I remember you saying that. I think they played BC at BC, right? 2020 was it? But they were top 10 there. and hopefully they, turn the, flip the switch on being competitive and start to win those big games. Even though they've been competitive, 95 record's really good. Like you said, this year they're going to have some big games, whether it's against even Clemson, South Carolina, week 1 will be a test. If they can win more of those big games, they'll get even more, of a name for themselves in college football. But I'm rooting for them for your sake, and obviously you're a big UNC basketball guy, and that was another team that was ranked pretty high going into the year, and things just didn't work out there for them. But what are your expectations of them? I'll only take another minute of your time here. But what are your expectations of them heading into this year? Obviously, they have Armando Bacot coming back and RJ Davis back as well. They lost Caleb Love, which I think you're a fan of that move, if I remember right. But where do you see that UNC basketball team going?
I mean, it's a team that has a lot of change. I mean, they had 7 or 8 kids transfer out. Caleb Love going to Arizona, and then a couple of more bit pieces. DeMarco Dunn and Dontrez Styles, Puff Johnson, some of those guys leaving. So none of those I think are massive losses. Just because I think Love had kind of overstayed his welcome and stuff. I think obviously when you have a core of Bacot and RJ Davis, 2 guys who have seen it all at this point, that's pretty good. They had a freshman, top 10, 5-star reclassify Elliot Cadeau the other day. So, add that to Cormac Ryan from Notre Dame and Jalen Withers from Louisville and Harrison Ingram, I think, is going to be really good from Stanford. Maybe some other guys step up. Jalen Washington, Steph Trimble. They're going to have the talent, I think, and they just needed a more cohesive roster that worked together. Obviously, last year we saw, the whole Love and Davis thing did not really work out together on the court, and Bacot was frustrated not getting enough touches. So, it's one thing to have talent. I mean, it's almost, in a positionless game, it's tough to have all those pieces not fit together. And I think they tried to build a more functional roster this year, and so we'll see where it goes.
Definitely. I'm excited to see when the schedule comes out as well. They'll be playing BC. I know they played BC last year. It was at UNC, so I'd imagine. And they played them at BC as well, did they? It was
No,
it was 2 years ago at BC, I think, when they played them on New Year's, I believe, if I remember right.
Yeah, they were up about 35 at halftime.
Yeah, I mean, they beat BC pretty good in the ACC tournament this year, didn't they? Even with it being, a tougher season for them. I think they beat them by 25, if I remember right. I remember I was texting before that game, which was obviously a tough one for the Eagles. But, hey, technically, as you've said, I mean, you're a BC fan now. It's UNC first, but you're a BC fan second, being an instructor there as well. Professor in my eyes.
When they're playing Duke, yeah.
When they're playing Duke. I know you're not a big Duke guy, so that's why you're not a big Daniel Jones guy, which I remember right. But, hey, I'm a big DJ guy. I think he's going to have a big season this year. But my Clipper prediction didn't really work out. So, win the NBA Finals this year. So, at least my Daniel Jones takes, have worked out. But I remember in your class, my hot take was either going to be Daniel Jones, the top 8 quarterback in the league, or the Clippers going to win the NBA Finals. And obviously the Clippers didn't really work out. Didn't even win a series, unfortunately. But that's basketball for you. That's sports. But like you said, though, with UNC basketball, a lot of those guys coming big transfers, and you get your 2 best players coming back. Even though Love was the leading scorer last year at 17 a game, just about. Bacot averaging 16, Davis averaging 16. You get those 2 guys back, and then obviously add a lot of those guys, in the transfer portal. They're going to have a lot of juice in that lineup, a lot of scoring potential, and hopefully make it run in the ACC tournament. I know you'll be watching no matter what, whether they're, a top 5 team in the country or they're having a tougher season like they did this year. And considering they were 20-13 this year, that's a tough season. That just shows how good a program they have. 2013 and missing the tournament.
Well, they were also the number 1 team in the country heading in that didn't make the tournament, so I wouldn't characterize it as a success.
It wasn't a success, but a season that's 2013 being a really bad season, that's impressive on its own. I mean, 2013 to BC would be their best season. You know what I mean? So,
right.
But a team that was number 1 with Brady Manick and all those guys coming back with the expectations to win it all. Obviously, it was a failure in that regard, but. They still have a lot to build on. Hopefully, get themselves back on track. And I'm sure you'll be at the game this year at BC no matter what happens.
Absolutely. It's right down the road. Going to make it happen.
Why not? Anyways, Chris, don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you so much for coming on. Truly is a pleasure having you come on here and talk all things sports. Hopefully, I'll have you back on here again soon.
Sounds good, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate
Thank you so much, Chris. Have a good one. Take it easy.
You too.
So there you have it. It was Chris Cotillo of MassLive.com. Much appreciated for him taking the time here to come on here and talk. Whether it was the Red Sox, whether it's college football, whether it's college basketball, always a pleasure being able to talk sports with him in general. He knows it all. I definitely wouldn't be in this position right now if it were not for him and his sports journalism workshop on Zoom. I did that a couple summers ago now in July of 2021. Learned a lot. Everything I know now, whether it's how to form an episode, form topics for an episode, or how to edit things, or how to even write, sports journalism-wise. I've learned everything I know, whether it's writing-wise or, having a podcast and radio show-wise from him. Learned a lot through his class, whether it was on Zoom, the sports workshop, or it was the covering sports in the digital age class that I took this past year at BC last fall during my senior year. Learned a lot from him. So thank you so much, Chris. And if anyone's interested in sports journalism, he's a great guy to talk to. You should take his journalism workshop, as I said, on Zoom. Check out his Twitter, and he does have a good amount of classes every now and then. Does a few of them every summer. So definitely check it out on his Twitter if you guys are interested in that. But anyways, that will conclude this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I'll definitely have another episode or two in the next day or so to talk about the College World Series. The Super Regionals have already been figured out. The regional round is over, and even though my predictions on the right side didn't go too well, on the left side I do have LSU still alive, but my Vanderbilt and NC State predictions going to the Final Four in the College World Series didn't really work out, but that's sports predictions for you. That's hot takes. That's how it goes, especially with sports radio and sports podcasting. You need to have hot takes. You can't just always say it's going to be, the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl or LSU winning the finals. Had a hot take in there, having NC State in the Final Four, and obviously that didn't go my way, but, that's sports view. Anyways, thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. Once again, thank you so much to Chris Cotillo of MassLive.com for coming on here. Check out all of his articles online. Check out his Fenway Rundown podcast as well on Spotify. Check out his articles on MassLive.com, and make sure to give him a follow on Twitter at Chris Cotillo on Twitter, and check out his sports journalism workshop as well. As I said, that was a great way for me to learn everything I know now in the industry. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys have a good one. Take it easy, stay safe, and stay well.